Hi everyone, welcome back to the Growing Generations podcast. This is episode number 5, and we have a completely new garden topic to discuss with you guys, as well as a completely new gardener to interview on this episode. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and welcome Lannie from Gingerfoot Garden.
Hi everyone, I am Lannie Armstrong from Gingerfoot Garden and I live here in Maryland Zone 7 and I would say I do gardening mostly in my backyard in my deck garden. It's more like an extension of my garden, but it's a pretty small garden. I mean, it depends on what is your definition of small garden, but it's a fairly small garden and I basically grow mostly vegetables that I use for cooking and everything for consumption, but a little bit of ornamental plants, but mostly on vegetable gardens.
That's amazing. So I actually met Lenny from a podcast or a live stream we were both invited to, and we were actually showcasing the said episode from Enoch from
Hmm.
the Urban Gardener. She was featured as the Instagram page, and I was featured as the YouTube channel of the week. So I was able to contact her through there, and I definitely wanted her on the show because she definitely has a wonderful story to share, as well as she has some great knowledge to share with everybody who wants to learn more about growing their own food and get their hands in the garden. So, from like any other episode, we're going to be interviewing her so you guys will be able to know her a little bit more about her gardening journey and everything that has to be with you knowing who she is and what she dedicates herself to. So, coming in at number 1, like I say, every gardener has a unique gardening experience when they first start introduced into gardening, whether that be by a family member or whether that be by a video you saw or an item. Doesn't matter what it is. What was your very first gardening experience?
So I would say, as far as first gardening experience, I would track it back to watching my mom grow a little bit of ornamental plants in our porch garden back in the Philippines. And back then, I don't really care so much about gardening because I feel like my interest was not into it. So I never really considered myself as someone who actually loved gardening until the pandemic, when I felt like we are just so unsure of everything that's happening in the world. And back then, I was starting to feel that, I don't know if the term is called paranoia, but I was starting to feel more worried, more paranoid about what could be happening in the world. And I know it's not a very natural feeling to me, and I did not like it. So I wind up like looking for something that will get my mind off of the worry from the pandemic. So back then I didn't know what it is exactly. But one time I was walking with a friend of mine in a neighborhood just so we could get a little bit of exercise. And then we saw this lady. She was on her, I believe it was actually a red truck, where she had all kinds of plants laid out in her truck, trying to sell them for a really cheap price. And then I don't know if there's a lot of people who have interest in the plants back then, but then she was giving us like a $2, $3 price for the plant, and we were like, we didn't have money with us because we were just walking in a neighborhood. So you're like, my house was close by back then in to the place where we found her. So we're like, we'll come back and then get some money so we get some some plants from you. So those are the first few plants that I got, and then my goal back then was just to keep those plants alive. So I brought home succulents, spider plant, and I think euchera. And it was so cool to me to have a little bit of plant that I could care for. And I started learning about gardening from then.
That's great, definitely. Like I say, every person has a unique gardening experience or their first gardening experience. Definitely, by what I told many people, is that we welcomed a whole bunch of gardeners after the pandemic
Hmm.
happened or hit. We welcomed a whole bunch of gardeners into the garden industry who were willing and passionate towards
Hmm.
gardening and willing to learn some things as well as help others people to get inspired to get into gardening. So, like I said, in the garden industry, there's always inspiration that tends to roam around. Like it's either by you could get inspired by a landscape design you saw, or by a video you saw, or by a gardener. Usually every gardener gets inspired to do more. So who or what inspired you to get into gardening?
Yeah, I would say my inspiration would be one of it would be my mom, and as far as the people who inspired me a lot, Kevin from Epic Gardening, I watched a lot of his video back then. There's also a lady, she is when Gary and I forgot her name. Yeah, yeah. There's a couple of gardeners that I actually watch a lot in the beginning, and Laura as well. Laura from what's her name? Yeah,
Garden answer?
yeah, Guardian Answer. So there's a couple of them. One of them one of them is also my favorite, but I keep forgetting her name. Robbie, and Gary on YouTube. There are three, at least three of the people that I could think of that definitely inspired me to try a lot of things as far as gardening.
Definitely. Laura has to be a gardener who inspired me as well because when I started gardening, I was pure ornamental gardening. I didn't want to do
Mm-hmm.
nothing with vegetables. But I started like dipping my feet into growing your own food and then I found my passion towards it. And Kevin from Epic Gardening, he did inspire me to get to do more. And when I got into contact with him, he definitely gave me some tips and tricks in the garden as well as helping me out. So definitely those are three great gardeners that inspired you because they inspired multiple people out there to do more
Oh
gardening
yes.
projects as well as to step out of their comfort zone and do
Mm-hmm.
more.
Mm-hmm.
So in your gardening journey, there is things that you're able to love and sometimes there's things that you don't really love so much. So out of everything in your gardening journey, what would have to be your favorite thing that you always look up to when you do gardening?
That's honestly a difficult question because there's in general I love growing the things that I like eating, but I would say the ones that I grew up eating back in the Philippines that are a lot more expensive to buy here. One would be the water spinach, which we call in the Philippines kangkong, moringa. Those are among the things that I'd say I love growing a lot because it's more expensive to buy them from the Asian store, or if not expensive, they're difficult to find anywhere else. So I like growing the things that are more difficult to grow, but that comes with a little bit of challenge because they don't grow well in cold climate like ours here in Maryland. But you can make things work. But I actually have one here. I'll have a little moringa tree behind me that I am growing indoors, and I love that I can harvest something uh, all throughout the season.
That's great. Yeah, I think my neighbor has a moringa tree like right
Ooh.
here like uh it's kind of sunny but it's in this little
Uh
area
huh.
right here. He's growing moringa as well, and I'm growing moringa as well. It's definitely a great plant to grow because it's really medicinal. And so definitely, so you'd have to say that your favorite thing about gardening would have to be, kind of growing the things that you're used to growing at your homeland,
Mhm.
and like you can't usually find so easily here in
Mhm.
America.
Mhm.
And I definitely have to agree because there's like certain plants that I love growing that usually aren't ever so found here in the United States. So
Mhm.
definitely I have to agree with you on that, and it's wonderful that you're starting to like grow things you're more used to and
Mhm.
you're able to enjoy them as well. So uh, from the entire gardening journey, we grow a whole bunch of plants. We try a whole bunch, we grow a whole bunch, we see how they grow in the garden. So out of your entire list of plants growing, what would have to be your favorite plant you absolutely love to grow?
Well, I've really been enjoying. I want to say I love calamansi. It's definitely one of my favorites, calamansi. But I have really just been starting to grow it. But now I would say the one that really excites me a lot is the ginger, just because I have finally learned how to grow it in my zone. So I grew up in the Philippines, which is a tropical country. Just actually where you are, it's you could probably grow ginger whole year round, but here in our
Yep.
zone, it's so challenging to grow them in colder climate. But then I finally figured out how to do it, and I'm definitely excited because I found that there's a lot of people who are actually interested in growing it. So I was really stoked with my last harvest from the last growing season. So I wanted to replicate it again. And with that, I basically started ginger grow along so that people who are interested in growing it will be able to grow it as well. Hopefully they do have a successful harvest this year as well. So yeah, I would say that's the one that's basically exciting me a lot. Make me feel excited a lot this year.
Definitely agree. When I can literally grow anything all year round because I don't experience winter. Like this
Mm-hmm.
winter season, the lowest I've gotten was in the high 40s. That's
Mm-hmm.
it. That's usually only during nighttime that
Mm-hmm.
happens.
Mm-hmm.
And so we stay around the 50, 60 temperature area. So I'm able to grow almost anything I want during the winter. And I did grow ginger and I did get a successful amount, but there's definitely some things that could have improved on. So I definitely have to say ginger is one of my favorites because everything happens underneath the soil, so you don't really tell what you're gonna get up until harvest time. So definitely have to agree with you on that. So on the opposite spectrum of things, what would have to be your least favorite plant to grow?
Yeah, with that one, I would say the ones that I actually don't really enjoy eating. So I would say fennel would be one. I feel like fennel is one of the plants that you really can't companion plant with a lot of plants because of how it grows. Plus, I honestly don't like the taste of it, so I would not even try to grow fennel. And another one that I've tried, like I think the first year I've gardened is endive. I did not like the look, or I just did not like it. So after that, I'm not growing this again.
Definitely. So there's definitely like in our gardening journeys, we tend to grow a lot of plants. We trial a lot of plants.
Mhm.
So there is some that tend to fall into that category
Mhm.
that you would prefer not to grow because either it's too stressful for them to grow, you don't like how they look, you don't like how they perform, or
Mhm.
you don't like how they taste in the kitchen. So I
Mhm.
definitely have to agree with you on that because I've never grown fennel before,
Mhm.
and I'm not interested in growing fennel since my family doesn't even eat it. Like this one time, I was interested in growing white tomatoes. It's called the variety is called Italian ice,
Uh huh.
and my mom was like a bit like she's like I'm only used to the red tomatoes. Like like it's kind of hard to grow a lot of varieties, especially with my mom. She's like, you sure they won't like poison me or something? I'm like, really? And so it's like definitely a whole bunch of trial and error we would per se here in the United States. And so definitely I would have to say that you I would have to agree with you on those selections.
Thank you.
So, like I said in the beginning, that we were introducing a whole bunch of new gardeners after the pandemic. Hence, you
Mhm.
said that you got more into gardening after the pandemic, especially after what the world was going through.
Mhm.
And that means that we introduced a whole bunch of creative gardeners, a whole bunch of new ideas were surfaced on this on the beginning. Once a whole bunch of people are entered, which means a whole bunch of gardening techniques were actually introduced into the garden industry as well to make gardening easier. So, out of all the gardening techniques out there, what would have to be your favorite gardening technique out of every gardening technique out there?
I don't know if you could count vertical gardening as a technique.
Yes, it's a
Yeah,
good technique.
it is. For my space, I have a huge ambition to grow a lot of things, even if, with my gardening space constraints, I wanted to grow a lot of vegetables. So that's when I would utilize vertical gardening technique. I mean, I don't have a lot of vertical garden setup, but I use most of it by using some of the trellises, so I could maximize growing a lot of things. Like even with watermelon normally sprawls in the ground, right? But what I did with mine is I train it to go up so that it would grow vertically. I did it as well with sweet potato, just so I could I would say actually vertical gardening and dense planting, just because like I said, it maximizes the space that you have. And for a small space garden like ours, pretty much that's the only way. So I would say those have to be the my favorite techniques of gardening.
Those are great techniques, actually. Vertical gardening is, I know, something a lot of gardeners do, especially if they have limited gardening space.
Hmm.
So they have to figure out how to use their area wisely. And so, vertical gardening, like you said, like the watermelon, is a plant that likes to vine out in the
Mm-hmm.
ground, but it's actually possible to grow them on a very sturdy like trellis or support system, and they're able to grow like vertically, so you could grow other stuff without having to dedicate a huge amount of space to that particular plant. And with sweet potatoes too, that's actually a wonderful idea. I've never thought of that because I grew sweet potatoes one year in my garden and they took over. Like they were
Mm-hmm.
not giving up. Like they took over. So definitely vertical gardening when it comes to those types of plants definitely do work, and dense gardening as well. Which something I like to do here is companion planting, which is
Mm-hmm.
something that probably you do as well, where we grow multiple different veggies in the same area that can grow well together without fighting for water or nutrients or etc. And they grow well together, so we can have a vast variety of harvests when time comes without dedicating like the entire garden to only like one particular plant. So definitely have to agree with you on that, and those are great. Like this is the first time a gardener said those type of gardening techniques on the podcast. So definitely those are two great gardening techniques to consider if you have limited space to grow in.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to mention as well that I mentioned sweet potato and watermelon, correct? Those two, I actually combine them in because I grow in containers as well. I combine them. So basically, the sweet potato and the leafing, what do you call this? The leaves, basically, they're both combined in the same trellis. I have the sweet potato and the watermelon in that same spot. So the watermelon is basically fruiting on the top. The fruits are hanging on the trellis that I've created, basically the A-frame. And then the sweet potato are, developing under the ground. So that's definitely a great technique that people could try.
That is definitely an amazing technique people could try, as well as great like tips or plants that could grow well together. So definitely thanks for that, because I never really thought watermelon and sweet potato could grow together in a container. So that's definitely great.
Thank you.
Okay, so now moving towards the media side of things. I know you own a Instagram page called the Gingerfoot Gardener, and so I really love what you do on Instagram. It's really amazing to see what you post on there. And so, what would have to be your main goal for the Gingerfoot Garden?
So really with the gingerbread garden, I would love to just be able to grow it a little bit more. Because now I feel like I hit a plateau, but because I try to be gracious to myself when it comes to that, just because, there's a lot of challenges in life. In reality, we're not going to be able to have perfect everything. And right now, I used to be able to post every day, but now it has to be like twice a week. And I do not like it, but right now I'm in that season of life. So I've come to terms that like that may be my time to kind of slow down for a little bit until I'm able to. And last next year I'm gonna be not gonna be teaching anymore. I'm not really teaching, but I'm sub teaching and working as a part time aide. So that takes a lot of my time. So that's one of the reasons why it's a lot harder for me to do things right now. But my goal is really just to be a little bit more consistent with my posting and to have a lot more valuable content in the future. And I would say, and that will be my goal for social media, just to be a little bit more organized.
That's a great goal, because I have to agree, especially right now since like I'm a high school student, I have a lot of time in my hands, so I'm able to post constantly. But there's gardeners out there like you who have jobs to fulfill, and gardening is like a side hustle for you guys. So definitely, I have to applaud you on that, because staying on top of posting and everything can be difficult at times, especially if the content is not at the level you would desire it to be. And so definitely that is a great goal for the Gingerfoot Garden Instagram page.
I actually want to say that.
So moving on a little bit to more future wise, where do you see yourself in the future?
Hmm. I would say I really never really planned to be, the gardening influencer or a content creator. I just saw it as an opportunity and I took advantage of it. But I would say I'm hoping I could grow my YouTube channel a little better next next this year, because by the end of school year I'm hoping to be able to work more on, the more long form content, so that I could post more on YouTube. That will be my goal for this year. I'm just trying to think about more realistic goal. I don't really have a plan to do anything more fancy than that, just to do a little bit better with what I'm already doing.
Definitely. I've heard multiple gardeners say that they want to start YouTube, but it's a bit time consuming.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have to agree because YouTube can be a little bit time consuming, especially when it comes to planning out the video,
Mm-hmm.
planning out what you're going to discuss, the content you're going to give, the information you're going to provide, and make sure that that information is correct and not misleading.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to edit the video and then upload it and then stay on top of the comment section whenever a comment is given. So definitely it can be time consuming. That's why some people take it as a full-time job.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to like the funner type side of things, YouTube is really fun because you're able to interact with your audience
Mm-hmm.
members a lot more, and you're able to know more about other gardeners,
Mm-hmm.
and they can help you a little bit with your garden
Mm-hmm.
if they see something that they can improve on. That it's definitely a fun thing to do on YouTube. Since I dedicate most of my time on YouTube, I definitely have to, you know, agree with that. It is time consuming, but I feel like you're gonna knock it out the park because you have great content on Instagram. So I feel like you'll do great on YouTube. It wouldn't be such a huge thing for you.
Oh, thank you so much.
So wrapping up the more side of the interview type of things, where can people find you if they are interested to join your gardening journey?
Oh yeah, so when it comes to socials, I am on Instagram as Gingerfoot Garden. I'm also on TikTok and Facebook. Yeah, so those are where mostly I post my stuff on Instagram, but I've been cross posting a lot of my contents to those other platforms, just so I could, broaden the horizon and also meet more amazing gardeners.
Definitely agree. And I know a whole bunch of gardeners are starting to dip their feet into the TikTok platform, although it was like a questionable platform in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to say that TikTok is really fun because
Mm-hmm.
the videos can be 1 minute long or 2 minute long, but it can be packed with information.
Yeah.
Especially since TikTok is such a trending platform
Mm-hmm.
right now, the algorithm is great over there. I started my TikTok page a few months ago, and it's been a blast. Like people are like hungry to desire more about gardening techniques as well as what could they do to improve their gardening tricks and tricks. So definitely TikTok is one to check out, and I'll be also leaving all her information in the description box below, so it could be a little bit more easier access. So you guys could just click on the links and go follow her because Lannie is definitely someone to follow since she is really inspiring. Her work is great, and she knows what she's doing. So definitely go check her out. So now moving into the garden topic of the week, which is growing root crops tied into your favorite plant, which is ginger. So growing root crops can be a little bit difficult for certain gardeners, especially if you live in an area that deals with compacted soil or your soil is not really too good for root crops. And I know root crops can be a little bit stingy, especially since what you're harvesting or you're eating is the root portion, which is growing underneath the soil. So if you have any tips or tricks or techniques you could give towards people who are interested in growing root crops and want to have success in it, is there anything or advice you could give to them about growing root crops?
All right. So when it comes to root crop, I would say focus on the soil, because that's where they are gonna be growing. And with root crops, because they develop and they have to form some sort of a tuber or a rhizome. So the soil has to be well draining, and it has to be a good quality soil. So a compost and something mixed with perlite and a little bit of sand. I use a little bit of multi-purpose sand, and I picked the one that has the one that people could use for what do you call this? Play-doh, not Play-doh, sand, for playing with sand. Sorry, I lost
Like a
the word for
sandbox.
it. Can you say it again?
Like a sandbox.
Yes,
For
yes.
like a playground thing.
Yes,
There you go.
yes, that's the word. Yeah, so the all-purpose sand was the one I've used, and perlite, and also I find the value of using vermiculite as well, because vermiculite is not only for adding for helping with aeration, but it also helps retain the moisture in the soil. So definitely, I've learned to not take for granted vermiculite aside from using perlite.
Those are some great tips, and I have to agree with you on that because what's the most important part about growing root crops have to be the soil because that's what they're drawing their nutrients from. So
Mm-hmm.
definitely to prevent like compaction in the soil, definitely consider adding perlite and vermiculite, which are two components you can use to aerate the soil, as well as vermiculite also retains a little bit of moisture so your crops doesn't tend to dry out as often, and the watering or the humidity left in that soil could be at a constant like line so it doesn't dry out as often, as well as I know another component people use is peat, which retains a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
moisture, but vermiculite is ideal because it serves as two purpose in one.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely something else I would recommend is probably like you said, adding compost or amending the soil,
Mm-hmm.
because what's important to root crops is the nutritious value in the soil, since that's what they're drawing in to produce like the carrot or the bee or the fennel or the turnip, doesn't matter what it is, they need proper nutrition to go ahead and form that decent root crop.
Mm-hmm.
So make sure you definitely do those tips of adding aeration to the soil, amending it. Um, I know a lot of gardeners actually grow root crops in raised beds or in containers because they're able to manage what their plants are getting fed. So that's definitely something to take in consider it. So those are great tips and tricks to growing root crops. And I have to agree with you, Lenny. Those are amazing tips that you gave. And like I would have said those two because aeration has to be the key element
Mm-hmm.
for a proper root to develop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
So definitely.
even with like you have mentioned container. Like if you have a compacted soil, I would say definitely consider growing either in raised bed where you have better control of the soil, and also container. To me, container gardening has been excellent, has been amazing to me because you are able to grow a lot of things that you probably would not have imagined that you could grow in a small little space.
Definitely agree. And a container or a fabric container,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
Smart Pots, for example, they have great containers or products that allow root crops to develop nicely. And their soil, especially when it comes to Smart Pot containers, what
Mm-hmm.
I realized is that they allow aeration in and out of the soil, so the
Yes.
soil is never compacted, as well as it also helps with your plants not getting root bound
Mm-hmm.
and your plants choking themselves out. So Smart Pots is definitely a container I would recommend like using for root
Mm-hmm.
crops, but as well as any other regular fabric container or raised bed gardening or uplifted gardening, definitely
Mm-hmm.
try to consider those where you're able to manage what your plants are growing in. So that was definitely an amazing gardening topic, and I know that was trending since I know the classic carrot, the
Mm-hmm.
classic beets, and the fennel, and the turnips, and the what's it called, radishes. A lot of gardeners love to grow those common root
Mm-hmm.
crops, but sometimes, especially what I've noticed, is that they have more like failure towards carrots because carrots are a bit more picky on what they're growing in. So definitely with these tips that Lenny gave, they are definitely ones to consider and apply to your proper garden so you can have the best success at growing root crops to your desire or the varieties you desire. So we discussed about the interview and we discussed about the garden topic. So that's gonna be it for this episode. This is episode number 5, and we have Lenny from the Gingerfoot Garden. So thank you again so much for joining with us. It was an amazing interview, and it was definitely fun to talk to you and more people get to know about you as well as what you have to offer.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And honestly, I think when I saw you on the Let's Get Growing live, I was like, wow, 16 years old. Amazing. Because, I 16 years old, I don't know what I was doing in my life. I'm pretty, I mean, I was getting ready to, in life, but I've never really thought about doing something like you are doing right now. So I would say I applaud you for for this thing that you are starting and for your inspirations in life. You are just amazing. I just want to say that.
Thank you so much. I know a lot of people get surprised when I say I'm 16 and I'm starting ever so young, but it's just something I love doing and
Mm-hmm.
I have great passion towards, and literally that's what my career is going to be. And I have to applaud you as well because your
Mm.
gardening content is the best, especially with that ginger harvest. I know you have it pinned on your Instagram
Mm.
page. That was a phenomenal harvest, and your stage presence is amazing. Your information is 100% correct. You know what you're doing. You love what you're doing, so you're able to transcript your passion and enthusiasm towards gardening to your viewers. So I have to congratulate you on
Oh.
that, and I feel like you're gonna go places. And definitely, I would love to have you on my channel, not on the podcast, is not as a separate collaboration together. I would love to have that with you. So that's definitely a project to plan later in the future. So that's gonna be it for this interview and podcast with Lannie from the Gingerfoot Gardener. I'll be leaving all her media info in the description box below. So make sure to go ahead and go check her out, give her a follow, and go watch her content because she's definitely one to watch. So we're gonna go ahead and see you guys in the next one.
Bye
Bye.
bye.